Under no circumstances do you approach King Darius. He isn't just an alpha. He is a biological weapon in a tuxedo, a creature so ancient and volatile that most wolves faint from the sheer pressure of his aura. So naturally, when the mating bond snapped into place and the entire ballroom held its breath waiting for him to tear me apart, I didn't bow. I didn't bare my neck. I looked the most terrifying monster in history dead in the eye and asked him if he liked Italian food. Welcome back to Raven's Library, where the stories are wild and the romance is fierce. One of my absolute favorite things about this channel is knowing that our pack stretches all across the globe. We might be miles apart, but right now, we're all curling up to listen to the same story together. So do me a favor before we dive in. Head down to the comments section and let me know, where in the world are you listening from right now? I read every single one, and I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now get comfortable. Let's let the king roar. Chapter 1. The Wallflower with Teeth. Zara adjusted the hem of her dress and seriously considered setting the velvet curtains on fire just to create a distraction. It wasn't that she hated parties, she hated this party. The annual Lichen Gala was essentially a high-budget meat market where alphas circled like sharks and omegas were expected to swoon on cue. "I'd rather chew my own foot off," she muttered, grabbing another champagne flute from a passing waiter who looked terrified to be there. She was currently hiding behind a massive ice sculpture of a howling wolf, using the melting tail to obscure her from the view of the pack heir, Brad. Brad had been trying to corner her for the last hour to explain the intricacies of his gym routine, a conversation Zara felt would likely induce a coma. "You're hiding," a voice sneered. Zara didn't flinch. She took a sip of the expensive bubbles and turned to see Chloe, a high-ranking female with hair so blonde it was practically offensive. "I'm not hiding, Chloe. I'm strategizing," Zara said, her voice dry. "There's a difference. Hiding implies fear. Strategizing implies that if one more alpha asks me to smell his success, I'm going to commit a felony." Chloe scoffed, crossing her arms. "You should show some respect. You're an unranked wolf in a room full of royalty. You're lucky they even let you in the service entrance." "And yet, here I am, drinking the same champagne as you." Zara smiled, sharp and predatory. It was a bluff, of course. Zara knew her place in the hierarchy. Dead last. But she had learned a long time ago that if you acted like you owned the building, most people were too stupid to check the deed. "Go find a mate, Chloe. I hear Brad is looking for someone to listen to him talk about protein powder." Chloe huffed and stomped away, leaving Zara in blissful, icy silence. She checked her watch. 20 minutes. She just had to survive 20 more minutes of this pretension, and then she could slip out the side door, go home, and put on sweatpants. She took a step toward the exit, her heels clicking on the marble, when the air in the room suddenly changed. It wasn't a subtle shift. It was violent. The chatter, the clinking of glasses, the string quartet, it all died instantly, as if someone had sucked the oxygen out of the ballroom. The hair on Zara's arms stood up, not from cold, but from static electricity. A heavy, oppressive weight settled over her shoulders, a biological command that screamed at every wolf in the room to drop, substrate, submit, freeze. Zara's knees wobbled, but she locked them. She grabbed the edge of a table to keep upright, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she whispered, the humor gone. The massive double doors at the top of the grand staircase didn't just open, they groaned as they were pushed wide. The silence was absolute. 300 wolves stood paralyzed, heads bowed, exposing their necks in a wave of instinctual terror. Zara didn't bow. She couldn't. Curiosity, her fatal flaw, forced her to look up. A man stood at the top of the stairs. He was massive, his tuxedo straining against shoulders that looked like they could carry a mountain. He didn't move like a person. He moved like a predator deciding which gazelle to eat first. He radiated a power so dark and thick, it tasted like burnt sugar and ozone on Zara's tongue. King Darius, the primal sovereign, the wolf who hadn't taken a mate in 500 years, because rumor had it his beast was too volatile to coexist with a partner. He took one step down, and the floor seemed to vibrate. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He wasn't looking at the bowing dignitaries. His head snapped up, nostrils flaring. And then his eyes, glowing like molten gold, locked directly onto Zara. Chapter 2. The Scent of Gold. The bond didn't feel like a red string of fate or a warm, fuzzy blanket. It felt like a sniper had just taken a shot at Zara's chest and missed the heart by an inch, leaving a gaping, burning hole that only one thing could fill. And that thing was currently descending the grand staircase with the grim determination of a natural disaster. Zara's breath hitched, caught somewhere between a scream and a cough. Her fingers dug into the silk tablecloth so hard she heard the fabric tear, a tiny ripping sound swallowed by the deafening silence of the room. "Run," her survival instinct screamed. "Hide. Dig a hole. Play dead." "Stay," her blood sang back, turning her veins into liquid fire. "He is ours." "Shut up," she hissed under her breath, squeezing her eyes shut for a millisecond to break the connection. When she opened them, he was closer. King Darius moved with a predatory grace that defied his size. The crowd parted for him like water fleeing a shark, nobles tripping over their own expensive gowns to get out of his vector. It was pathetic. It was terrifying. And it left Zara standing completely alone in a clearing of polished marble, the ice sculpture of the wolf dripping mournfully beside her. He wasn't looking at the dukes or the duchesses. He wasn't acknowledging the alphas who were practically pressing their noses into the floorboards in submission. His gaze was a physical weight, a tether hooked into Zara's navel, reeling her in. She tried to step back, to put the table between them, but her legs had decided to unionize and go on strike. They were locked solid. The only thing she could move was her chin, which she forced upward. If she was going to die or be kidnapped by a mythological warlord tonight, she wasn't going to do it looking at his shoes. The scent hit her fully as he crossed the halfway mark of the room. It rolled over her in a suffocating wave. Dark espresso, rain on hot asphalt, and that sharp, metallic tang of ozone. It was the smell of a storm about to break. It was intoxicating. It made her mouth water, which offended her deeply. She did not want to find the frightening man appetizing. 10 feet. The air pressure dropped so low her ears popped. The guests nearest to them were trembling visibly. Chloe, who had been so smug moments ago, was now huddled behind a pillar, looking like she might pass out. 5 feet. Zara's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. It sounded like a frantic bird trapped in a cage. But she didn't look down. She clenched her jaw, narrowing her eyes. "Don't you dare," she thought, projecting the thought as loud as she could. "Don't you dare treat me like I'm just another conquest." He stopped. He was massive. Up close, big was an insufficient adjective. He was a wall of muscle encased in midnight blue wool. He towered over her, blocking out the chandeliers, blocking out the exit signs, blocking out everything but the swirling gold of his irises. Up close, she could see the jagged scar running from his jaw down into his collar, a testament that even monsters bleed. His breathing was heavy, ragged, as if he had just run a marathon. His hands, large enough to crush her skull with a casual squeeze, clenched and unclenched at his sides. The tension radiating off him was hot enough to blister paint. The silence stretched, thin and agonizing. The entire court was watching, waiting for the violence, waiting for him to grab her by the hair and drag her out. Darius inhaled sharply, his nostrils flaring as he took in her scent, vanilla and defiance. A low, vibrating growl started in his chest, a sound so deep it didn't just reach Zara's ears, it rattled her bones. It wasn't a greeting, it was a claim. Slowly, terrifyingly, he raised his hand. He reached toward her face, his fingers trembling with restrained force, aiming to touch her cheek, to mark her, to own her. Zara's eyes widened. The distance between his fingertips and her skin closed to inches. She could feel the heat radiating from his palm. There was no escape. Chapter 3. The Roar Heard Round the World. Zara's hand moved faster than her survival instinct. Before the king's fingertips could graze her cheek, before he could stake his claim and turn her into a footnote in royal history, she slammed her palm flat against the center of his chest. The sound of the impact was soft, a muffled thud against expensive wool. But in the mausoleum quiet ballroom, it sounded like a gunshot. "Stop!" Zara commanded. Her voice didn't tremble, though her knees felt like they were made of damp paper towels. The entire room inhaled as one. A duchess in the front row actually fainted, crumpling to the floor in a heap of silk, but no one moved to help her. They were too busy waiting for King Darius to rip Zara's arm out of its socket. Darius froze. He looked down at the small, pale hand pressing against his heart, then back up to her face. His eyes were wide, the swirling gold turbulence within them pausing for a fraction of a second. He wasn't used to being touched. He certainly wasn't used to being stopped. The muscle beneath Zara's palm felt like steel plating wrapped in heat. His heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm that thudded against her fingers. "You," he rumbled, his voice sounding like rocks grinding together deep underground. "You stop me?" "I do," Zara said, chin lifting. "I don't know you, and I have a strict policy about being mauled by strangers, even if they are wearing very nice tuxedos." Darius tilted his head, a predator examining prey that had suddenly grown spikes. "You are my mate." "I am Zara," she corrected sharply, "and I am not a piece of furniture you can just walk in and collect. I am not a prize. I am a person." She took a breath, summoning every ounce of audacity she possessed. "If you want me, Your Majesty, you don't get to just take me. You have to earn me." The king blinked. The concept seemed foreign to him, like she had just asked him to solve a calculus equation in Mandarin. "Earn?" "Yes, earn," Zara insisted, removing her hand from his chest but holding his gaze. We are going to do this the hard way. You, me, a date." "A date," Darius repeated, the word tasting strange in his mouth. "Dinner," Zara clarified, "with forks and conversation and absolutely no biting." She pointed a manicured finger at his face. "Pick me up tomorrow at 7. If you're late, I'm not going. If you try to drag me to your cave, I'm leaving. Do we have a deal?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a car. The court watched in horror, convinced Zara had just signed her own death warrant. You didn't negotiate with the Primal King. You survived him. Darius stared at her. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. The golden light in his eyes flared brighter, scorching, intense. He looked at her pointed finger, then at her defiant eyes, and then at the pulse jumping frantically in her throat. Slowly, terrifyingly, the corner of his mouth twitched. He threw his head back, chest expanding as he inhaled a massive lungful of air. Zara braced herself, expecting an execution order. Instead, a sound erupted from him that shook the crystal tiers on the chandeliers. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a growl. It was a roar, a deafening, earth-shaking bellow of pure, possessive delight that vibrated through the floorboards and shattered 3 champagne flutes on a nearby tray. "My pleasure!" The sheer volume of it knocked the wind out of her. It was a declaration of war and a promise of devotion, all wrapped in one terrifying noise. Darius looked back down at her, a feral, wolfish grin splitting his face, transforming him from a stoic statue into something wild and breathtakingly handsome. 7 o'clock, he growled, his voice rough with amusement. "Be ready, Zara." He didn't wait for a response. He turned on his heel, his coat swirling like a cape, and marched back toward the exit, the crowd scattering like pigeons before him. Zara stood alone in the center of the ballroom, the echo of his roar still ringing in her ears. She looked at her trembling hand, then at the shattered glass on the floor, and finally realized exactly what she had just done. "Oh no," she whispered to the empty air. "He's actually coming." Chapter 4. 7 o'clock sharp. By 6:45 p.m., Zara had successfully evicted 3 royal stylists, a tailor, and a woman holding a terrifying assortment of hairpins who claimed to be the royal groomer. They had descended on her small apartment like a swarm of very fashionable locusts, armed with silk gowns that cost more than the entire building. Zara had physically shoved the last one out the door, clutching her chosen outfit to her chest like a shield. "I am going on a date," she had told them, barring the door with a chair. "Not a coronation. If I wear a tiara to a burger joint, I'm going to look like I've escaped from an institution." Now, she stood in front of her hallway mirror, smoothing down a simple black dress. It was elegant, sure, but it was hers. It had a slit up the thigh that said, "I'm dangerous," but a neckline that said, "I'm minding my own business." She applied a coat of red lipstick that matched the warning signs at a nuclear power plant and checked her watch. 6:59 p.m. "He won't come," she whispered to her reflection. "He's the king. He probably has a war to start or a moon to howl at. He was just humoring the peasant." At 7:00 p.m., the world ended. Or at least, that's what it sounded like. A low-frequency rumble started in the distance, vibrating the floorboards of her third-story walk-up. It grew louder, a mechanical roar that rattled her teeth and set off 2 car alarms down the street. It wasn't the polite purr of a limousine engine. It was the sound of a beast. Zara walked to the window and peered through the blinds. Parked illegally on the curb, taking up 2 spaces and scaring Mrs. Higgins' cat up a tree, was a motorcycle. But calling it a motorcycle was an insult. It was a black chrome monster, a collection of engine parts and tires so wide they looked like they belonged on a tractor. And straddling it was King Darius. He had ditched the tuxedo. He was wearing a black t-shirt that was currently losing the battle against his biceps, dark jeans, and heavy combat boots. He looked like the lead singer of a death metal band that actually killed people. He was checking his wrist, not a watch, just a bare wrist, and then looked up, his golden eyes locking onto her window on the 3rd floor with sniper-like precision. Zara's heart did a traitorous little flip. She grabbed her purse, took a deep breath, and marched downstairs. When she pushed open the front door, the silence on the street was heavy. Her neighbors were peeking out from behind curtains. Darius was leaning against the bike, his arms crossed. "You're on time," Zara said, stopping on the bottom step. "I am never late," Darius rumbled. His voice was lower than the bike's engine. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on the slit of her dress. His pupils dilated until the gold was almost swallowed by black. "You look adequate." "Adequate?" Zara raised an eyebrow. "I look fantastic. You, however, look like you're about to rob a bank." "A car felt too enclosed," he muttered, shifting his weight. He gestured to the bike. "Get on." Zara looked at the machine. "There's no sidecar. Where exactly am I supposed to sit?" "Behind me," Darius said, as if explaining gravity to a toddler. "Hold on to me." "And if I fall off?" "I will catch you." "We'll be moving at highway speeds, Darius. Physics suggests otherwise." "Physics obeys me," he said deadpan. He mounted the bike, the suspension groaning under his weight. He looked back at her, and for a second, the mask slipped. He looked eager. "Get on, Zara. Unless you are afraid." "I'm not afraid of a bike," she lied. She swung her leg over the seat, settling in behind him. The heat radiating off his back was intense, soaking through his thin shirt. She hesitated, her hands hovering near his waist. "Hold on," he commanded, his voice rough. She wrapped her arms around his torso. His stomach muscles were hard as granite. The contact was electric, a jolt of static that made her gasp. Darius stiffened, his head tipping back slightly as if he'd been shot. "Tight," he growled. He kicked the engine into gear, and before Zara could regret her life choices, they launched forward, tearing down the street with a speed that screamed lawsuit. Chapter 5. Table for 2, and a dozen guards. The restaurant Zara had chosen was Bernie's Steakhouse, a mid-range establishment known for its excellent ribeyes and its tolerance for loud patrons. It was definitely not known for hosting ancient lichen royalty. As they walked in, the hostess dropped her stack of menus. The chatter in the room died instantly. It wasn't just that Darius was famous, it was that he took up so much space. He had to duck to get through the doorway, and his presence seemed to suck the light out of the room. "Table for 2?" Zara said to the frozen hostess. "And no, we don't need the private room." Darius scanned the restaurant, his eyes narrowing as he assessed every exit and every patron. "Too many people," he murmured in her ear. "I can have them cleared in 3 minutes." "You will do no such thing," Zara hissed back, grabbing his hand to pull him toward a booth. His skin was scorching hot. "This is a date, Darius. Part of the experience is ignoring other people, not evacuating them." They squeezed into a booth. Darius looked ridiculous. He sat stiffly, his shoulders hunching to avoid brushing against the partition. He looked like a wolf trying to pretend he was a golden retriever. "Relax," Zara said, opening her menu. "The calamari is good here." "I do not eat squid," Darius said, eyeing the silverware with suspicion. "Why is this fork so small?" "It's a normal fork. You're just enormous." The waiter arrived, a young college kid named Steve with a nervous smile. "Hi, I'm Steve. I'll be your—" "Oh, God." Steve stopped as he looked at Darius. Darius stared back, unblinking. "Water," Darius commanded. "And a bottle of the house red," Zara added quickly, flashing Steve an apologetic smile. "Thank you, Steve." Steve scrambled away. "You smiled at him," Darius said. The temperature at the table dropped 10 degrees. "He's the waiter, Darius. It's polite." "He smelled like fear and cheap cologne," Darius grumbled. "And he looked at your neck." "He looked at my necklace," Zara corrected, though she wasn't entirely sure. "Stop growling. You're vibrating the table." "I am not growling," he lied. A low rumble was definitely emanating from his chest. The date proceeded with the tension of a bomb defusal operation. Darius ate his steak rare, very rare, with a precision that was terrifying to watch. He answered Zara's questions in monosyllables, but he watched her with an intensity that made it hard to swallow. He tracked every movement of her fork to her mouth, his eyes hungry. Then, disaster struck. Steve returned to refill the water glasses. In his nervousness, he leaned too close to Zara, his arm brushing against her shoulder. "Sorry, miss," he stammered, his hand lingering for a fraction of a second too long on the back of the booth near her hair. Crack! Zara jumped. In Darius's hand, the heavy crystal wine glass had ceased to be a glass. It was now a collection of sparkling dust and jagged shards. Red wine dripped from his fist like blood, staining the white tablecloth. The restaurant went silent. Darius didn't look at his hand. He didn't look at the glass. He was glaring at Steve with eyes that were fully, blindingly gold. His lip curled back, revealing the tips of elongated canines. "Touch her again," Darius whispered, a sound that carried to the back of the kitchen, "and I will remove the offending limb." Steve turned pale and backed away, dropping the water pitcher. "Darius!" Zara slammed her hand on the table. She wasn't scared. She was furious. She grabbed a napkin and reached for his hand. "Look at me!" He slowly turned his gaze from the fleeing waiter to her. The gold faded slightly, replaced by a dark, swirling confusion. He was breathing hard. "Give me your hand," she ordered. He opened his fist. The glass had cut his palm, but even as she watched, the skin was knitting itself back together, the wounds closing up. "I told you," Darius rasped, his voice full of self-loathing. "I am not built for dinner." "No," Zara said softly, wiping the wine from his fingers. "You're just not used to sharing." She looked him in the eye, refusing to look away. "But if you growl at one more minimum wage employee, I'm leaving." Darius stared at her, his chest heaving. He looked at her hand cleaning his. "You are not afraid?" "I'm annoyed," she said. "There's a difference." He leaned across the table, ignoring the blood and wine, invading her space until his nose was inches from hers. The air crackled. "You should be afraid," he murmured, "because right now I am trying very hard not to take you right here on this table." Chapter 6. I Don't Want Your Kingdom. Zara woke up the next morning not to the sound of birds, but to the sound of heavy machinery. She groaned, rolling over and checking the clock. 8 a.m. Her head was still spinning from the night before. The date had ended with Darius dropping her off at her door, refusing to kiss her because, as he put it, "If I start, I will not stop, and your neighbors will call the National Guard." She dragged herself out of bed and walked to the window. Her jaw dropped. There was a flatbed truck parked outside. A crane was currently lifting a large velvet-covered crate onto her sidewalk. Beside it sat a brand-new cherry-red sports car that looked like it cost more than the entire neighborhood. And standing in her driveway, looking uncomfortable in a suit, was the royal steward, holding a scroll. "You have got to be kidding me," Zara muttered. She threw on a robe, marched downstairs, and burst out the front door. "What is this?" she demanded, gesturing to the circus on her lawn. The steward bowed low. "Gifts from His Majesty King Darius, a token of his affection." He unrolled the scroll. "This vehicle is a custom interceptor. The crate contains rare silk from the Eastern Territories, and this," he handed her a thick envelope, "is the deed to the Isle of Crows. You now own a small island chain." Zara stared at the envelope. She looked at the car. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks. Not a blush, but pure, unadulterated rage. "He bought me an island?" she asked quietly. "It has a lovely castle," the steward offered helpfully. "Take it back," Zara snapped. The steward blinked. Pardon?" "Take it all back. The car, the silk, the island." She shoved the envelope into the steward's chest. "And tell Darius I'm coming to see him." 40 minutes later, Zara stormed through the main gates of the royal palace. The guards, who had clearly been briefed on the she-wolf who yelled at the king, scattered like bowling pins. She didn't stop for security. She didn't stop for the receptionist. She marched straight to the massive double doors of the throne room and kicked them open. Inside, Darius was in the middle of a war council. He was sitting on his obsidian throne, surrounded by generals pointing at maps. When the doors banged open, every general reached for their weapon. Darius raised a hand, stopping them instantly. He looked up, and a flicker of surprise and hope crossed his face. "Zara?" He stood up. "Did you like the island?" Zara marched down the long red carpet, ignoring the room full of lethal warriors. She stopped at the foot of the throne steps, hands on her hips. "You are an idiot," she announced. The generals gasped. One of them actually choked. Darius frowned, stepping down from the dais. "I am the king. I am not an idiot." "You sent me a country, Darius, and a car. Do you think I'm a prostitute?" Her voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "Do you think you can just pay for my time with shiny objects?" Darius stopped in front of her. He looked genuinely confused. "I am providing for you. That is what a mate does. I have resources. You should have them." "I don't want your resources." Zara poked him in the chest again. "I have a job. I have an apartment. I don't want your money, Darius. I don't want your power." He grabbed her hand, stopping the poking. His grip was firm, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles. "Then what do you want? I have given you the world." "I don't want the world." Zara said, her voice dropping, trembling slightly. She looked up into his confused golden eyes. I want to know you. I want to know why you have that scar on your neck. I want to know what you look like when you laugh. I want you, you big, dumb brute, not your wallet. The silence in the room was profound. The generals were staring at the floor, pretending they weren't witnessing the king being scolded like a naughty puppy. Darius stared at her. The confusion in his eyes slowly melted away, replaced by something softer, something dangerous in a different way. He realized, for the first time in 5 centuries, that he couldn't buy this. He couldn't command this. You want me? He whispered. Just the beast? Just the man, she corrected. Although the beast is growing on me. Darius signaled to the generals without looking away from her. Leave. Everyone out. But sire, the border dispute, one general started. Out, Darius roared, never breaking eye contact with Zara. The room cleared in 10 seconds flat. The heavy doors boomed shut, leaving them alone in the vast, silent hall. Darius took a step closer, crowding her space. He reached out and touched a lock of her hair, treating it like it was more fragile than the glass he had shattered. No one has ever refused my gold, he murmured. I do not know how to do this, Zara. I do not know how to be just a man. Well, Zara said, her heart hammering as she stepped closer, bridging the gap. You're smart. You'll figure it out. Darius looked at her lips. Then he looked at the throne behind him. Then back at her. A dark idea seemed to form in his mind. If you do not want the island, he said, his voice dropping to a seductive rumble, then perhaps I can offer you a different kind of tour of the kingdom. He gestured to the empty throne. Sit. Chapter 7. The Midnight Walk. Zara did not sit on the throne. Instead, she grabbed the king's hand, a hand that had crushed armies and shattered wine glasses, and pulled him toward the heavy velvet curtains at the back of the hall. If we're doing this, she said, we're doing it without an audience. No generals, no thrones, just fresh air. Darius followed her. It was a surreal sight for the few servants scuttling through the corridors, the terrifying Primal King being towed along by a woman half his size, looking less like a monarch and more like a man sleepwalking into a dream. They ended up in the royal gardens, a sprawling labyrinth of moonlit hedges and silver fountains that looked like something out of a fairy tale, if fairy tales included 10-foot-high iron fences and perimeter patrols. But here, in the center, it was quiet. The air smelled of jasmine and the damp earth of the night. I have not walked here in a century, Darius admitted, his voice low. He was walking beside her now, matching his long strides to her shorter ones. His hands were clasped behind his back, a picture of restraint. Why? Zara asked, kicking a pebble off the path. It's your garden. You paid for the mulch. It is peaceful, Darius said, as if that explained everything. My beast does not like peace. It prefers noise, chaos. It keeps the silence from becoming loud. Zara stopped near a fountain where water spilled from the mouth of a stone dragon. She turned to look at him. The moonlight washed out the gold in his eyes, leaving them a pale, luminous yellow. In this light, the scar running down his neck looked stark, a jagged canyon of white tissue against his tanned skin. "That scar," Zara said softly. She didn't ask permission. She reached out, her fingers hovering inches from his neck. "You heal instantly. I saw your hand earlier. What could possibly leave a mark on you that didn't fade?" Darius stiffened. For a moment, she thought he would snap at her, retreat into his fortress of solitude. But he didn't pull away. He leaned into her hovering hand, allowing her fingertips to brush the raised skin. "Silver," he rasped. "Liquid silver poured into the wound by a brother who wanted my crown. It burned the ability to heal out of the flesh." Zara's breath hitched. She traced the line of the scar down to his collarbone. "Your brother?" "He is dead," Darius said, devoid of emotion. "I killed him. That is what kings do, Zara. We survive. We kill. We do not have dates or walk in gardens. We are monsters who sit on thrones of bone." He looked at her, his expression tortured. "You asked for the man, not the wallet. But there is no man here. There is only the survivor." Zara didn't flinch. She stepped closer, placing her other hand on his chest, right over his beating heart. "You're wrong," she whispered. "A monster wouldn't feel guilt, Darius. A monster wouldn't be afraid of hurting me. You're just lonely." Darius looked at her as if she had just spoken a spell. The self-loathing in his eyes cracked, revealing a vast, terrifying vulnerability. He raised his hand, covering hers on his chest, trapping her warmth against him. "Lonely," he repeated, the word sounding foreign. "Yes, I suppose I am." He looked down at her lips. The air in the garden suddenly felt very thin. Chapter 8. The Almost Kiss. The sky broke open without warning. One moment, they were staring at each other in the moonlight, suspended in a fragile bubble of intimacy. The next, the heavens unleashed a torrential downpour that soaked them to the bone in seconds. "Run!" Zara laughed, grabbing his hand. They sprinted through the mud, Zara shrieking as the cold rain hit her skin, Darius moving with effortless speed beside her. They scrambled up the steps of an ancient stone gazebo, collapsing onto the dry marble floor under the dome. The rain hammered against the stone roof, creating a wall of white noise that cut them off from the rest of the world. It was deafening and isolating and incredibly intimate. Zara pushed wet hair out of her face, breathless and laughing. Her dress was plastered to her skin, turning sheer in places. "Well," she gasped, wiping water from her eyes. "So much for the hair." She looked up. Darius wasn't laughing. He was standing near the edge of the gazebo, staring at her. The water dripped from his dark hair, running down the sharp planes of his face. His shirt was soaked, clinging to every ridge of muscle on his chest. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. The gold was back, bright, burning. "Darius?" she whispered. He took a step toward her, then another. He moved like a landslide, inevitable and dangerous. The playfulness of the run was gone, replaced by a raw, hungry tension that made the air taste like metal. "You are wet," he growled. The sound wasn't human. It was pure alpha. "It's just rain," Zara said, her voice trembling. She backed up until her spine hit a stone pillar. Darius followed. He placed a hand on the pillar beside her head, boxing her in. He leaned down, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. His nose brushed her wet skin, sending shivers of electricity violently down her spine. "You smell like the storm," he murmured against her throat. His hot breath ghosted over her pulse point. "You smell like mine." Zara's hands came up to grip his wet shirt. She should push him away. She should tell him to back off. Instead, she tilted her head back, baring her neck. "Darius," he groaned, a sound of agony. His lips grazed her jawline. His other hand came up to grip her waist, his thumb digging into her hip with bruising possession. He was trembling, vibrating with the effort to hold back. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted him to mark her. The biological imperative screamed, "Yes." Darius lifted his head. His mouth hovered inches from hers. She could see the elongated points of his canines. He looked at her lips with a starvation that terrified her. "I want to taste you," he whispered, his eyes wild. "But if I start, I will tear this dress off you. I will take you on this cold floor, and I will not be gentle." Zara looked into the abyss of his eyes and made a choice. She rose on her tiptoes, closing the gap. "I didn't ask you to be gentle." Darius flinched as if she had slapped him. The beast roared in his eyes, taking over. He surged forward. And then he ripped himself away. With a snarl of frustration, he hurled himself backward, out into the rain. He stood in the downpour, his back to her, chest heaving, hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I cannot!" he roared at the storm, his voice cracking. "I will not break you!" And before she could call him back, he shifted, bones cracking, fur erupting, and a massive black wolf tore off into the darkness, leaving her alone in the gazebo. Chapter 9. The Library. Zara didn't go home. She didn't call a cab. She marched back into the palace, dripping wet and furious, and demanded to know where the king went when he was sulking. The terrified head of staff pointed her toward the west wing. 10 minutes later, Zara pushed open the double doors of the royal library. It was a cavernous room, 3 stories high, filled with the smell of old paper and leather. A fire was roaring in the massive hearth, casting long, dancing shadows against the shelves. Darius was there. He was human again, wearing dry pants but no shirt, sitting in a leather armchair by the fire, with a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He didn't look up when she entered. He looked exhausted, the weight of centuries pressing down on his bare shoulders. "You ran away," Zara announced, her voice echoing in the silence. Darius swirled the liquid in his glass. "I retreated for your safety." "I don't need safety," Zara said, walking over to him. She grabbed a blanket from the back of a sofa and wrapped it around her damp shoulders. "I need a partner who doesn't bolt every time he gets a boner." Darius choked on his drink. He looked up at her, eyes wide, coughing. "That is a crude oversimplification." "Is it?" Zara walked to the nearest bookshelf. She ran her fingers along the spines, refusing to look at him. She needed to lower the temperature in the room. If they talked about the gazebo, he would clam up. She needed to engage his brain, not his body. She pulled out a book, Pride and Prejudice. "Classic," she muttered. She walked over to the rug in front of the fire and sat down, right at his feet. Darius watched her warily. "What are you doing?" "I'm reading," she said, opening the book. "Since you're clearly too emotionally constipated to talk, I'm going to read to you until you calm down." "I am calm," he lied. Chapter 1, Zara began, ignoring him. "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. She read. Her voice was steady, rhythmic, filling the silence of the massive room. At first, Darius sat rigid, watching the fire. But as she continued, reading about Elizabeth Bennet's stubbornness and Mr. Darcy's pride, the tension began to bleed out of him. After 20 minutes, she felt a weight settle on her shoulder. She didn't stop reading. She didn't move. Darius had slid off the chair. He was sitting on the rug behind her. He had leaned forward, resting his heavy head against her shoulder, his face buried in the blanket she wore. It was a position of absolute submission, leaving his neck exposed, trusting her completely. "He is like me," Darius mumbled into the wool, his voice thick with sleep. "This Darcy." "Arrogant and socially awkward?" Zara asked, turning the page. "Misunderstood," Darius corrected softly. His arm wound around her waist, not possessive this time, just holding on, anchoring himself. "Keep reading, Zara." She read until the fire burned low, feeling the terrifying Primal King fall asleep against her back, his breathing matching the rhythm of her voice. Chapter 10. The Sparring of Words. The next morning, the palace staff were treated to a sight that defied the laws of physics. The king was eating a croissant. Darius usually ate raw meat or protein shakes that looked like sludge. But this morning, he sat on the sunny balcony of the royal suite across from Zara, attempting to eat a flaky pastry without crushing it into dust. "You're making a mess," Zara pointed out, buttering her toast. "This food has no structural integrity," Darius complained, brushing crumbs off his dark shirt. "It is engineered to fail." "It's French, Darius. It's engineered to be delicious." Zara took a sip of coffee. "So, about your border policy regarding the southern pacts. I read the briefing on your desk while you were in the shower." Darius froze, a piece of croissant halfway to his mouth. "You read my classified intelligence reports?" "I skimmed them. You're too harsh on the rogue wolves. Most of them aren't criminals. They're just displaced. You should offer amnesty, not execution." Darius set the pastry down. His eyes narrowed, but there was no heat in it. "You have been in the palace for 48 hours, and you are already rewriting my foreign policy?" "Someone has to. You govern like a warlord from the 12th century." "I am a warlord from the 12th century." "Well, update your software," she retorted. "You can't just growl at diplomatic problems until they go away." "It has worked for 500 years, he argued. "And look how happy you were," Zara shot back, "sitting alone in your dark castle, scaring the maids." She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "Admit it. You like my idea about the amnesty program." Darius looked at her. He tried to maintain his scowl. He tried to summon the face of the Primal King. But the sight of her, wearing one of his shirts that engulfed her frame, with butter on her lip and fire in her eyes, broke something inside him. A noise bubbled up in his chest, a strange, foreign convulsion. He laughed. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a deep, rusty, booming sound that startled a flock of birds off the railing. The nearest guard actually dropped his spear. Darius threw his head back and laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that erased years from his face. "You are impossible," he wheezed, shaking his head. "Amnesty. Ridiculous. I will consider it." Zara smiled, a victorious grin. I knew I'd break you eventually. She reached across the table to wipe a crumb from his cheek. It was an innocent gesture, playful. But the moment her skin touched his, the laughter died. Zap! A visible spark of blue static arc between her finger and his cheek. It was loud enough to hear, a sharp crack. Darius jerked back, his hand flying to his cheek. His eyes flashed gold instantly. The mirth vanished, replaced by a sudden, jagged line of pain between his brows. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Darius? Zara pulled her hand back, her fingers tingling. It is starting, he whispered, his voice straining. The bond. It is done waiting. He looked at her, and the affection in his eyes was warring with a ravenous biological hunger that made the hair on her arm stand up. The play is over, Zara, he rasped. My control is slipping. Chapter 11. Skin to Skin. The diplomatic function was technically a peace treaty celebration with the Northern Pax, but to Zara, it felt like a gladiator arena where the weapons were passive-aggressive compliments and overpriced hors d'oeuvres. She stood by the orchestra pit, smoothing the silk of her emerald gown. It was a bold color choice, the color of envy, or perhaps radioactive waste, but she wore it like armor. The court had stopped whispering about her as the human-loving stray. Now they whispered about her as the king's handler. You look tense, Darius murmured, appearing at her elbow. He didn't materialize from smoke. He just moved so silently that physics seemed to give him a pass. He was in full regalia tonight, a military dress uniform laden with medals from wars that weren't in history books. He looked devastating. He also looked like he was in pain. I'm not tense, Zara lied, glancing at his clenched jaw. I'm just wondering if the ambassador from the north is going to try to sniff me again. If he does, Darius said, his voice a low, jagged rumble, I will remove his nose. Darius, I am serious. I have a very sharp knife in my boot. The orchestra began a waltz, something heavy on the cellos, mournful and romantic. Darius didn't ask. He simply extended a hand. It was a command wrapped in a request. Dance with me. Zara hesitated. Since the incident at breakfast, the spark that had sounded like a gunshot, they had been careful. No prolonged touching, no hand-holding. They circled each other like magnets with the same polarity, pushing against the invisible force field of the bond. Is that safe? She whispered. No, Darius admitted, his golden eyes burning. But I do not care. She placed her hand in his. The reaction was instantaneous. It wasn't a spark this time. It was a current. A hum of energy shot up Zara's arm, bypassing her nervous system and hitting her brain with a wash of pure dopamine. She gasped, stumbling forward. Darius caught her, his other hand splaying across the exposed skin of her lower back. Heat. Searing, branding heat. They moved onto the floor. The court gave them a wide berth, forming a terrified circle of onlookers. Darius pulled her close. Too close for propriety, perfect for disaster. Every place their bodies touched felt like it was dissolving. His chest against hers was a wall of granite, but his heart was hammering a frantic, erratic rhythm that matched her own. You're burning up, Zara whispered, looking up at him. His skin was flushed, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. The bond, he gritted out, spinning her through a turn. It is tired of waiting, Zara. It demands resolution. We can leave, she offered, her voice breathless. The scent of him, ozone and dark spice, was making her dizzy. We can go to the car.
If we leave, Darius said, his voice straining as he tightened his grip on her hip, bruisingly possessive.
I will not make it to the car. I will take you in the hallway. I will take you on the stairs. He looked down at her, and the gold in his eyes was swirling, swallowing the pupil. I am losing the ability to be civilized. A visible arc of blue static snapped between their chests, loud enough to be heard over the violins. It stung, a sharp bite of electricity. Zara winced, but she didn't pull away. I'm not asking you to be civilized. Darius stopped dead in the middle of the dance floor. The music faltered as the musicians realized the king had frozen. He stared at her, his chest heaving, the air around them warping with heat. You do not know what you ask, he snarled softly. Chapter 12. The Warning. The static snapped again, this time jumping from Darius's collar to Zara's neck. It left a red welt on her skin. Darius saw the mark. His reaction was terrifying. He shoved her away. It wasn't a gentle push. He physically launched her backward, breaking the contact so violently that she stumbled and nearly fell, caught only by a shocked bystander. Get back! Darius roared. The sound shattered the windows. Not just one, all of them. The floor-to-ceiling glass panes of the ballroom exploded outward in a shower of glittering rain. The orchestra scrambled, cellos abandoned. The guests screamed and dropped to the floor. Zara stood amidst the chaos, glass crunching under her heels, staring at him. Darius was hunched over, clutching his head. His uniform jacket tore at the seams as muscles expanded unnaturally beneath the fabric. He wasn't shifting, not fully, but the beast was clawing its way to the surface, bypassing the human mind entirely. Darius! Zara stepped toward him. Stay back! He turned to face her. Zara froze. His face was contorted, unrecognizable. The gold of his eyes had bled into the whites, turning his entire ocular surface into pools of molten metal. His canines had descended past his lip, glistening with saliva. He looked like a nightmare. He looked like a god of war. I cannot stop it, he gasped, his voice sounding like it was coming from a gravel grinder. The rut. It's here. It's too strong. He clawed at the air, fighting an invisible enemy. Run, Zara. You need to run. If I get my hands on you right now, I will break you. I'm not leaving you, she yelled over the screaming aristocrats. You're in pain. I am not in pain, he bellowed, smashing a fist into a marble pillar. The stone pulverized, dust raining down on his dark hair. I am starving, and you are the only thing I want to eat. He looked at her then, and the hunger in his expression was so raw, so predatory, that for the first time, Zara felt a flicker of genuine fear. Not for her life, but for the reality of what he was. He wasn't a man. He was an apex predator who had been fasting for 500 years. Guards, Darius commanded, the word tearing from his throat. The royal guard, armored and terrified, rushed in from the perimeter. Take her, Darius ordered, pointing a trembling clawed finger at Zara. Take her to the east wing. Lock the gates. Do not let me near her. No! Zara tried to dodge the nearest guard, but he grabbed her arm. Darius, don't do this. Let me help. Get her out, Darius screamed, falling to his knees as his spine cracked audibly.
Get her out before I kill everyone in this room just to get to her." The guards dragged Zara backward. She fought, kicking and screaming his name, but they hauled her through the double doors. The last thing she saw before the heavy oak slammed shut was King Darius throwing his head back and unleashing a howl of pure, agonizing need that shook the foundations of the palace. Chapter 13. The Locked Door. The palace was not sleeping. It was hiding. Zara sat on the floor of the hallway in the west wing, not the east wing where she had been ordered. She had escaped the guards by threatening to jump out a window, and then she had doubled back. She was currently camped out 10 feet from the reinforced steel door of the king's private sanctuary. From the other side of the metal, it sounded like a demolition crew was at work. Every few minutes, there was a crash, the sound of heavy furniture being reduced to kindling. There were growls, low and continuous, like a thunderstorm trapped in a box. And occasionally, there was silence, which was infinitely worse. "Miss?" the captain of the guard whispered. He was standing a safe distance away, looking at the door with wide eyes. "Please, you cannot be here. The walls, they are not soundproof enough. The pheromones alone could induce a biological reaction in you." "I'm fine," Zara said, pulling her knees to her chest. She was not fine. Her body was humming, her skin sensitive to the air, responding to the calls of her mate on the other side of the wall. "He's alone in there." "He has to be," the captain said grimly. "The king's rut? It is legendary. The last time this happened was 300 years ago. He destroyed a wing of the castle. If you go in there, Miss Zara, he will not recognize you. He will act on instinct." "He knows me," Zara insisted, though her voice wavered. "He's Darius." Crash. Something heavy, likely a bed frame, slammed into the door from the inside. The steel buckled outward slightly, creating a dent the size of a fist. The metal groaned under the assault. The captain flinched, hand going to his weapon. "He is trying to get out. He smells you," another guard whispered. "He smells her." Zara stood up. She walked to the door. The metal was warm to the touch. "Darius?" she called out softly. The crashing stopped instantly. On the other side, she heard heavy, wet breathing, a sniffing sound right at the crack of the door. He was there, pressed against the steel, separated by 3 inches of metal. "Zara," a voice rasped from the other side. It wasn't human. It was guttural, broken. "Go away." "No," she said, glean her forehead against the cool steel. "You locked yourself up to protect me, but you're hurting yourself." "I must," the voice groaned. Then came the sound of claws scraping down the metal, a screeching noise that made her teeth ache. "If I open this door, I will not ask. I will not woo. I will ravage." "I'm tired of the wooing, Darius," Zara whispered, her hand flat against the dented metal. "I'm tired of the talking." "You do not understand," he roared, and the door shook again as he slammed his body against it. "I am a monster. I will hurt you." "Open the door," Zara commanded. "No!" "Open it, or I will find the override code," she bluffed. She didn't have the code, but she knew him. "I am not afraid of your beast, Darius. I am afraid of you being in there, thinking you're unlovable." Silence. Then the heavy electronic lock beeped. The red light on the panel turned green. The captain of the guard gasped. "Run, miss!"
The heavy steel door didn't open slowly. It was ripped open. Chapter 14. The Choice. The door didn't just open. It was torn from its magnetic hinges with a screech of tortured metal. The heavy steel slab swung outward, groaning as it slammed against the corridor wall, embedding itself inches deep into the plaster. In the jagged opening stood a creature that was only arguably a man. Darius was unrecognizable. His clothes were gone, shredded into rags that hung loosely from his hips. His skin was flushed a dark, feverish red, covered in a sheen of sweat that made him look like he had been forged in a furnace. But it was the size of him that stopped the breath in Zara's throat. He seemed to have expanded, his muscles swollen and taut, veins standing out like ropes against his arms. His fingers were tipped with curved obsidian claws, and his eyes. His eyes were two voids of spinning, molten gold, devoid of pupils, devoid of humanity. "Run!" the captain of the guard choked out, backing away so fast he tripped over his own boots.
"Miss Zara, for the love of God, run!"
Darius scanned the hallway, his head snapping from side to side with jerky avian movements. He was hunting. He let out a low, vibrating chuff, a sound that vibrated in Zara's teeth. Then his gaze landed on her. He froze. The hunting motion stopped. He lowered his head, his shoulders bunching as a growl built in his chest, rising in volume until it sounded like a jet engine idling. "Zara," he said. The name was mangled, spoken through a throat that was halfway shifted into a wolf's larynx. "Go." Zara didn't move. She stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her face remained calm. She looked at the terrified guards who were raising their tranquilizer rifles. "Put them down," she commanded, her voice cutting through the panic. "Miss, he is in a feral state," the captain shouted. "We have orders to tranquilize if he breaches containment." "I said put them down!" Zara spun on them, her eyes flashing with a ferocity that rivaled the king's. "If you shoot him, you'll have to shoot me first. Leave us!" "But leave!" she screamed, pointing down the hall. "That is a direct order from your future queen. Go!" The guards hesitated, looked at the hulking nightmare in the doorway, looked at the small woman shouting at them, and made the smart choice. They ran. The sound of their boots fading down the hall left a heavy, suffocating silence in their wake. Zara turned back to Darius. He hadn't moved. He was watching her with a mixture of hunger and agony, his claws digging into the doorframe, gouging deep furrows into the wood. "You dismissed the guard," Darius rasped, saliva dripping from his chin. "Foolish." "I don't need guards to talk to my boyfriend," Zara said, taking a step toward him. "I am not your boyfriend right now," he snarled, backing up into the darkness of his room. "I am a biological imperative wrapped in violence. Do not cross the threshold, Zara."
"I cannot hold it back anymore." Zara looked at the dark, destroyed room behind him. She looked at the blood on his hands from where he had punched the walls. She looked at the loneliness in those terrified, golden eyes. "Good," she whispered. She stepped over the twisted metal of the doorframe and walked into the lion's den. Behind her, she grabbed the handle of the broken door and heaved. It shrieked in protest, but she managed to jam it shut, engaging the manual deadbolt. She turned to face him. They were locked in. Chapter 15. The Beast Unleashed. The room looked like a hurricane had trapped itself indoors and died of boredom. The massive four-poster bed was splintered kindling. The antique armoire was overturned. The curtains were shredded ribbons. The air was thick, hot, and smelled so heavily of alpha, of musk, cedar, and ozone, that Zara felt lightheaded just breathing it in. Darius stood in the center of the wreckage, panting. He looked at her as if she were a ghost. "You locked the door," he whispered. The shock seemed to give him a momentary flicker of clarity. "Why would you lock the door?" "Because I'm not leaving," Zara said, kicking a piece of a shattered vase out of her path. "And you're not leaving. We're going to finish this." "There is no finishing this," he groaned, clutching his head as if splitting in two. "The bond, it wants to claim. It wants to bite. It wants to own." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "I do not want to own you, Zara. I want you to be free." "I am free," she said, walking steadily toward him. "I'm free to choose, and I choose this." She stopped 3 feet away from him. The heat radiating off his body was intense, like standing next to an open oven. "Look at me," she said softly. Darius shook his head, squeezing his eyes shut. "If I look, I will take." "Then take," she challenged. His eyes snapped open. The gold was swirling so fast it looked like liquid fire. "What?" "I'm tired of the dates, Darius. I'm tired of the restraint. I'm tired of you treating me like I'm made of glass." She took another step. 2 feet. "You think you're a monster because you have instincts? You think I'm too weak to handle them?" "You are human soft," he growled, his hands twitching at his sides. "You are fragile." "I am the woman who walked into a room with a feral alpha and sent the army home," she snapped. She reached out and grabbed his hand. Darius flinched as if burned, the hiss escaping his teeth. But he didn't pull away. He couldn't. Zara placed his massive, clawed hand on her waist. The fabric of her dress was thin. His heat seared through it instantly. "I'm not fragile," she whispered, stepping into his personal space until her chest brushed his. "And I'm not afraid of the big bad wolf. I'm afraid of the man who won't let himself be happy." Darius trembled. The vibration started in his legs and moved up his spine. He looked down at her, his resistance crumbling like the furniture he had destroyed. The scent of her, willing, open, unafraid, was the final straw. "Zara," he choked out, his voice sounding like a crumbling mountain. "If I start, I will not stop until the sun comes up. I will not be gentle. I will be excessive." Zara reached up, her fingers threading into the hair at the nape of his neck. She pulled his head down. "Stop talking, Darius," she ordered against his lips, "and show me." The last thread of the king's control snapped. Chapter 16. My Pleasure. The growl that tore from his throat wasn't human. It was the sound of a dam breaking. Darius didn't kiss her, he devoured her. His mouth crashed onto hers with a desperation that bordered on violence, hot and hungry and overwhelming. Zara gasped, opening to him, and he swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing more than a feather. He didn't walk them to the bed. There was no bed left. He carried her to the only piece of furniture still standing, a heavy oak chaise by the window, and pressed her into the cushions. His body covered hers, a blanket of heavy muscle and scorching heat that pinned her down, making her feel small and safe and incredibly cherished. "Mine," he growled against her skin, his nose trailing fire down the column of her throat. "Mine, mine, mine." "Yours," she breathless, her hands gripping his shoulders, her nails digging in. "I'm yours." He pulled back, hovering over her. His eyes were wild, but there was no confusion in them anymore, only absolute, crystal-clear focus. He looked at her as if she were the only source of light in the universe. He traced the line of her jaw with a thumb that still bore the sharp point of a claw. Careful, so incredibly careful, despite the storm raging inside him. "You asked me for a date," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "You asked me to woo you." "I did," Zara whispered, her heart pounding in her ears. "And now?" he asked, his gaze dropping to the pulse point on her neck, the place where a mate mark belonged. "What do you ask for now?" Zara arched her back, offering herself to him. "I'm asking you to claim me, Darius. Make it permanent." Darius shuddered. He lowered his head, his lips brushing the sensitive skin of her neck. He paused there, his breathing ragged, the beast warring with the man one last time. "It will hurt," he warned, his voice a broken whisper. "The bite, it binds your soul to mine. You will never be alone again. You will feel my rage, my possessiveness, my love, forever." "Good," she said, wrapping her legs around his waist, pulling him closer. "I hate being alone." He groaned, a sound of pure surrender. He opened his mouth, his canines grazing her skin. "To be yours," he whispered against her flesh, the vibration running through her entire body. "To be bound to you." He paused, and for a second, the echo of their first meeting hung in the air. "It is," he growled, the words dark and heavy and full of worship. "My pleasure." Then he bit down. The world turned white. It wasn't pain. It was a supernova. A rush of golden energy exploded in Zara's mind, a connection slamming into place that was louder than sound and brighter than light. She felt him, the vast, ancient, terrifying ocean of his soul pouring into hers, filling every crack, every empty space. She cried out, not in pain, but in the sheer shock of completion. And Darius answered her, his roar of triumph echoing off the walls, sealing the pact, binding the king to his queen for as long as the moon turned. Chapter 17. The Morning Sun. The sun was rude. It streamed through the shattered window with a cheerful brightness that felt entirely inappropriate given the state of the room. Zara woke up slowly. Her body felt heavy, languid, and sore in a way that made her want to stretch and purr. She kept her eyes closed for a moment, just listening. The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't the heavy, terrified silence of the palace. It was a peaceful, settled silence. She opened her eyes. She was lying on the chaise, covered by a thick fur throw that had miraculously survived the destruction. And wrapped around her, acting as both a mattress and a blanket, was Darius. He was asleep, deeply asleep. For the first time since she had met him, the tension lines between his brows were gone. He looked younger. He looked human. One of his massive arms was draped over her waist, holding her tight against his chest even in unconsciousness. Zara moved slightly and the sheet slipped down. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in a shard of mirror still hanging on the wall. There, on the curve of her neck, was a mark. It was faint, a swirling pattern of raised skin that looked like gold dust had been tattooed into her flesh. The royal mark. She reached up to touch it, and a sleepy rumble vibrated against her back. "Stop wiggling," a rough, morning voice grumbled. Zara smiled. "Good morning, Your Majesty." Darius cracked one eye open. The gold was dim, lazy, like a sunset. He blinked at her, then tightened his arm around her.
You are still here. I told you I wasn't leaving. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling deeply. I had a dream, he mumbled, that I broke the room and frightened you away. Well, you definitely broke the room, Zara said, looking around at the devastation. I think you owe the taxpayers a new armoire. Darius lifted his head, scanning the wreckage. He winced. Ah, that was enthusiastic. It was expressive, Zara corrected. She turned in his arms to face him. He looked at her with a sudden, sharp intensity, his gaze dropping to the mark on her neck. He reached out, tracing it reverently. Does it hurt? No, she said. It feels warm, like you. Darius closed his eyes, resting his forehead against hers. I can hear you, he whispered. In my head, you are loud. I've been told I have a strong personality. You are happy, he noted, sounding surprised. I can feel it. You are not afraid. You are content. I am, Zara admitted. Are you? Darius opened his eyes. He looked at the destroyed room, then at the woman in his arms who had walked into the fire and refused to burn. I have been alive for 500 years, he said seriously, and this is the first morning I have ever wanted to wake up. He leaned in to kiss her, soft and slow and full of promises. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was tentative, coming from the battered steel door. Sire? The captain's voice was trembling. Your Majesty, the council is gathering. They heard the noise. They want to know if we should call the coroner. Darius pulled back, sighing heavily. The king was back, but this time he didn't look burdened by the crown. Get up, Zara, he said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. Let's go tell them that the king is not dead. He has simply been domesticated. Chapter 18. Long Live the Queen. Give us 5 minutes, Zara yelled at the door, her voice cracking slightly. She scrambled off the chaise, looking frantically around the wreckage. My dress is in ribbons, Darius. I can't address the royal council naked. It might send the wrong message about your management style. Darius sat up, stretching his massive arms. His back cracked, a sound like pistol fire. He looked unbothered by the fact that the entire government was waiting outside to see if he had murdered his date. You could wear a sheet, he suggested lazily. It is a toga, very classic, very regal. I am not wearing a toga to my first day as queen. Zara spotted a pile of clothes near the overturned wardrobe. She pulled out one of Darius's black dress shirts. It was miraculously intact, likely because it had been discarded in the first 10 seconds of the night. She pulled it on. It hit her mid-thigh, swallowing her frame. She rolled up the sleeves, belted it with a strip of silk from the ruined curtains, and ran her fingers through her wild hair. She looked in the shattered mirror. She looked like a woman who had just survived a hurricane and decided to keep the wind. Perfect, Darius rumbled, standing behind her. He had found a pair of drawstring pants in the debris. He didn't bother with a shirt. The scratches on his chest and the bite mark Zara had left on his shoulder were on full display. You look dangerous. I look like I stole your laundry, she corrected. She took a deep breath. Ready? Always. Darius walked to the battered steel door. It was warped off its tracks. He didn't bother with the handle. He simply planted a bare foot against the metal and shoved.
With a screech of protesting steel, the door flew outward, crashing onto the floor of the hallway. The captain of the guard jumped back, hand flying to his sword. Behind him, a dozen other guards stood ready. But beyond them, the hallway was packed. Ministers, dukes, servants. It seemed half the palace had gathered, drawn by the silence that had followed the roar. They stared at the king, half naked and scarred. Then they stared at the destroyed room behind him. Finally, their eyes landed on Zara. The silence was heavy. They were looking for blood. They were looking for a victim. Instead, Zara stepped over the fallen door. She didn't hide behind Darius. She didn't look down. She walked out with her chin raised, the king's shirt acting as her armor, the fresh claiming mark on her neck glowing faintly in the morning light. Darius stepped out after her. And then he did something that made the captain of the guard gasp audibly. He didn't lead. He didn't drag her. He stepped to the side and fell into pace half a step behind her. It was a subtle shift, but in wolf body language, it was a shout. The Primal King, the apex predator of the continent, was flanking her. He was guarding her back. He was ceding the floor. They walked down the long corridor toward the grand hall. The crowd parted instantly, pressing themselves against the walls. No one spoke. They were too busy staring at the mark on Zara's neck and the terrifyingly possessive look on Darius's face. When they reached the top of the grand staircase overlooking the main foyer, Zara stopped. Below them, hundreds of courtiers looked up. Darius stepped forward, resting his heavy hand on the small of her back. The touch was grounding. He looked down at the sea of faces, the people who had feared him for 500 years, the people who had thought he was a monster incapable of love. "You were waiting for a body." Darius's voice boomed, effortless and deep, carrying to the furthest corners of the hall without a microphone. "You were waiting for the beast to break the girl." He looked at Zara, and the harsh lines of his face softened into something unrecognizable to the court. Pride. "But the beast did not break her," he continued. "She broke the beast." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Darius grabbed Zara's hand and raised it high. "There will be no more fear in this hall. There will be no more silence. You have a king, but that is not enough." He turned to Zara, his golden eyes shining. "I command armies. I conquer territories. But she?" He looked back at the crowd, his voice dropping to a lethal, serious growl. "She commands me." He dropped to one knee. The sound of 300 people gasping at once sucked the air out of the room. The king was kneeling, in public, before an unranked wolf wearing a stolen shirt. Darius took her hand and pressed his forehead against her knuckles. "My mate," he said, loud enough for history to hear. "My equal." He looked up at the stunned crowd, his eyes flashing with a warning that dared anyone to disrespect her. "Bow," he roared, the sound shaking the stained glass, "to your queen." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, the captain of the guard dropped to his knee. The ministers followed, the dukes, the servants. Like a wave crashing against the shore, the entire court sank to the floor, heads bowed low. Zara stood alone at the top of the stairs, looking out over a sea of bowed heads. She squeezed Darius's hand, pulling him back up to stand beside her. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't hiding. She smiled, fierce and free. "About time," she whispered to him. Darius threw his head back and laughed, and this time, the whole world laughed with him.